It's a pleasure to be with you again at the People's Law School. My name is Kenneth Anderson. I'm with the Public Guardian's Office, the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and we're here today to talk about the legal issues of mental illness. I have with me today Miss Leah Edwards from Lourdes Hospital and Dr. Rakesh Chandra, who is a practicing psychiatrist. Good day. How's everybody?
Good.
Good.
Thank you. Doctor, tell us a bit about yourself. I understand that not only are you a practicing psychiatrist, a medical doctor, but you have a law degree as well.
Yes, I do have a law degree. I'm the medical director at Lourdes Hospital Behavioral Health Unit. I've been here in Kentucky for about a year and I've really enjoyed it. It's an excellent unit. We're developing a number of services. I have a law degree from Loyola and I did my training in Baltimore at Johns Hopkins and at the University of Chicago in Illinois.
How long have you been at Lourdes Hospital, Doctor?
It will be a year, I would say in June.
Okay. And during that period of time, you've had the pleasure of working with Miss Edwards, that I've worked with for a number of years. And Leah, I understand that you've been the case manager of the mental health unit, but now you've even gone further than that, correct?
Yes, I'm Director of Social Services at Lourdes Behavioral Health. I've been there about 6 years. I attended University of Kentucky. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and really been in mental health for about 15 years.
Well, we're here today to break down the legal issues of mental health. And in Kentucky, they fall into three categories. There's the voluntary mental admissions, the involuntary mental admissions, and of course the difficulties dealing with mental retardation. That's a subject we probably are not going to touch on because it's a family unit that usually practices itself as a child grows up and we're dealing with the lack of development. But with terms of mental illness, the voluntary admissions, they usually end up on your desk first, don't they, Leah?
Yes, the voluntary admissions?
Yes.
Yes, they usually come through with me and the doctor and the assessor and the ER.
Okay, and basically a person who feels that they are having difficulty with the society, with their problems, with their circumstance, they come to the hospital and they say, I just am really having a difficulty. How do you handle it from there? What's the process that we go through?
Usually when I see the patient after they've already been admitted, sometimes I do the assessment in the ER. Our admission criteria, it comes down to danger to self or others or symptoms that put that person's health at risk.
And what's the typical situation that you see presenting itself in a voluntary capacity?
I would say typically someone with severe depression, maybe someone who's gone without treatment or who hasn't been on medications and the depression has gotten worse to the point that they may be a danger to self or others, or the symptoms are so severe that they're putting their health at risk.
And of course, doctor, at that point they present themselves to you for treatment, and over the past year at Lourdes Hospital, what is your caseload for that situation?
I would say that we've had on the average about 20 patients at a given time. So it's almost like 100 admissions, 90 to 100 admissions to the psych unit every month. It's a very busy service.
And those are people who recognize they have a problem, or maybe their family has recognized and they are voluntarily submitted themselves to your treatment. But even that requires the intervention of legal process on occasion, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, because what happens is that patients don't realize when they come to the emergency room and they sign themselves in that they are really saying that they want to be treated and they want to stay on that unit till they are better. But sometimes, well, more than sometimes, we have the scenario where someone comes in, they've tried to kill themselves, cut their wrist, taken an overdose, they are admitted by the emergency room, they're on the unit for 24 hours, and the next thing you know, they're saying the next morning that I'm fine, I want to go home. And at that point, you have to point out to them legally, we can hold them up to 72 hours so that we can do a proper assessment, we can try and figure out what went wrong and how to make sure that when they go back that they don't have the same problems, stressors facing them, so they end up doing it again and unfortunately may be successful the second time.
And of course, those are circumstances where there's been some act of violence or act of self-injury as opposed to somebody who's just having a real bad set of days in a row.
Correct, correct.
And Leah, those circumstances begin to invade in the province of the involuntary admissions, where you and I have worked so closely for some number of years, where we are brought an individual who's in desperate need of treatment and assistance. How does that work?
And usually after they've been put on a 72-hour hold, and if they still aren't willing to stay voluntarily for treatment, and we have assessed that patient and feel like they still may be at risk of danger to self or others, we may have to start the 60-day hold process.
And how do you do that?
Usually it started with discussion with a judge, judge's involvement, and a lot of paperwork, and also Four Rivers Behavioral Health also is involved with an assessment. So we have an outside source also assessing that patient as well as our staff.
So if we have a situation where somebody's presented themselves at the hospital, they've had a really bad day, they've had an act of violence, an act of self-injury, or in the other half of the circumstance, a person brings a family member, a child, a brother, a sibling, even a close friend, and said he is becoming very violent, he's becoming very aggressive. The first issue is basically to utilize the resources that we have. And where would a family member call? What agencies would they seek help from?
One place that might be able to help, of course, is the police. If they, that person is out in the community. Of course, we have people call our unit, and they can call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they can kind of give us the scenario, and we will help send them to the proper resources, which may be to start a mental inquest warrant, maybe to go through the police for safety. Sometimes they can go to the county attorney's office and get it started there too.
Okay, and of course, one of my biggest systems of input is when I get a call from Social Services or the Division of Adult Protection from the Cabinet for Families and Health Services, and they're another agency that refers a number of people to you for, I hate to use the word containment, but at least placement for treatment, aren't they?
Adult protection, and we all as a community have a responsibility, if you have any concern for the safety of an adult, to report it to adult protection so that they can investigate. It's all of our responsibility.
Exactly. And of course, doctor, those cases where we bring somebody in against their will because they're running down the street with a tomahawk in their hand, that presents the most difficult scenario for you, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, because not only are they a danger to themselves, they are a danger to other people out in the community, but even when you bring them to the inpatient unit, they could be a danger to other patients. So the question of medicating them, sedating them, making sure that they're okay is a big issue, and it's a problem because they refuse to take medication. And so the question of administering that medication involuntarily is a problem.
And of course, again, the legal system has to come in to balance the rights of our society to protect itself.
Correct.
And the rights of the individual to be free from interference.
Correct.
Again, they end up back in the judicial system.
Correct.
Which is complicated, if not impossible, isn't it?
It is. It's very difficult. On one side, you have the patient who's really at risk for self-harm or harm to others, and the other side, you're waiting for this process to go through. Fortunately, we haven't had too many of those kind of issues, but it can present a big problem and really be something that you have to act on very quickly.
Yes. And of course, Leah, one of the important issues we have is the participation of family and friends, because they are the person who ultimately has to give us the advice or to present us with this scenario that we can convince the judge this medication should or should not be administered, isn't it?
And those are the people that know this person the best, and without their involvement, you just, you can't do as well.
That's the people that we're talking to today, our audience, is that if you have these health questions, if there are people in your family, people in your community that you know of, this is a stigma that the mental health questions across America are becoming more and more prevalent and more well known as we're freer to talk about it. And of course, you have helplines, assist lines, and everything through your unit and through the hospital, don't you?
Yes, anybody, like I said, can call 24/7 to our unit and kind of give a scenario, and we'll be happy to help or assist.
Now, Doctor, I understand you're also instrumental in some new programs at Lourdes toward either outpatient, medicational monitoring and supervision. Tell us something about those.
What happened is when I came here, they didn't have a lot of services. It was a very, I hate to say poorly run, but in Paducah, there are a lot of services that are needed but were not being provided. What we hope to do at Lourdes is to have a continuum of services which include an outpatient clinic, a partial hospital, and an inpatient. So anybody could actually walk in or call our number. we provide medication management, we provide assessments, and if they need further treatment from us, we'll provide it, but if they do not, then we can point them in the right direction and get them the help that they need, so that they don't have to be our patients, but they can be referred to appropriate places. And it's open to anybody. All they have to do is call our service and we will help them out.
And once we have identified that an individual needs these services, Leah, again, one of the services that our office provides to Lourdes is the guardianship role or the supervisor, and we would just assume that the people in the community, the family members, take over that role. How can you help them get that started?
The first place to start is at the county attorney's office, and that's where at least the emergency guardianship can start. And of course you want the least restrictive form of environment for that patient. So even whether it be hospitalization, guardianship, it's where they have their most rights and where they're the most safe.
And any member of the McCracken County Bar is able to contact the county attorney, even if they don't specialize or are knowledgeable in the issue of mental disability, can contact any number of offices for a family member to acquire guardianship, which doesn't need to be completely restrictive, but may be only to supervise their medication doctor, which is probably, in the most case, the biggest problem we have is not treating a patient, but continuing the treatment, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And a lot of our admissions, in fact, consist of this, that people are stabilized, they're put on the appropriate medication, they leave, they stop taking their medication, they feel that they're well or that they don't need it, and then what happens is they relapse and they're back again. So someone who is supervising and has the authority to make sure they take the medication, that's the key to the treatment.
And of course, Leah, as the social services, that's something that you're trying to get more and more families to recognize, is that we do have an obligation to our children, our siblings, our spouse, our parents, for someone to accept the responsibility to supervise that.
And we do a lot of education, family sessions, and things like that to support that.
Okay. In fact, there's an entire counseling session available through the Four Rivers, our local mental health center, that helps with family counseling to deal with these circumstances where you have a mentally ill family member, isn't there?
There's a group called NAMI, National Alliance for the Mentally Ill. Mm-hmm. It meets every Thursday, and I refer a lot of people there because it's education for the family and for the patient.
And they can get the directions to that particular meeting through your
yes.
hospital simply by calling the switchboard and asking for the unit, can't they?
Yes.
Okay. Doctor, one of the things that sometimes we are required to do is basically take physical custody of an individual who has crossed so far over the line they've become a recurrent and inherent danger to society. Luckily in Paducah we don't have quite that many, do we?
No, we don't. But it is a possibility, and you're always worried that it may come down to something like that. Sometimes these people can become so much of a danger to themselves and others that really there is no other choice. And that's a tough place to be in. I know your office probably deals with that all the time.
Unfortunately, too many. For the people who are watching the program, if they have a member of their family, a member of their community that they have questions about, what would you propose they look to see this person is having a difficult time and might need some help?
The question of bringing up the fact that someone needs psychiatric or psychological help is always very difficult. You know, people get offended if you say that, well, perhaps you should get some help. What they need to think of it is in the terms of this being similar to abuse, that if you report abuse or if you get help for abuse, you're not really harming the person, you're just being very cautious. So what they need to do is to look on that without the stigma. And one of the things, as I mentioned before, they could do is they could call us and we could then make a referral onwards as to where exactly they could get the particular help they need.
Okay. So Leah, if I have somebody in my environment that lives near my home and I see him acting what I consider to be out of the ordinary or bizarre, if I called you, what are some of the questions you would ask to try to trigger whether or not this gentleman or lady is just a little bit eccentric or basically has perhaps lost a couple of the bananas?
You know, maybe ask if you've heard them threaten themselves or other people, if you feel like they may be hallucinating or delusional, if you know if they're not eating properly or taking their medications as they should. And that also may be something that adult services, protective services might need to be involved in too. And that ways to get that person to a safe environment or to be assessed by Four Rivers or by us in the emergency room. Kind of instruction, education, or it could be the county attorney's office if that person's not willing to go for help.
So basically we would look at a pattern of behavior that would trigger a stimulus in us to say that's not quite what we expect. Now everybody has their eccentricities, and goodness knows I have enough for most of the people in McCracken County myself, but still you're looking for something so prevalent, so obvious that you begin to wonder, you know, and it's really our obligation to do something about it to protect our own society, isn't it?
Yes, as a community. It's our responsibility.
Right. Doctor, of all the aspects that the legal community, the Bar Association, the law enforcement agency, what we can do to help you in the treatment of these people, what are some of the things that you would suggest to the people in our audience that they should examine themselves and their family to make sure it doesn't happen to them?
Well, one of the things that often happens when a tragedy occurs is people will look back and say that, oh, I remember that this person used to do this thing or used to do that thing. For example, one of the cases we had, after this gentleman had done a lot of damage to his family and others, neighbors came out and said that he would bully the children in the community and things like that. So what I would suggest to the audience would be that if there are things that are going on that are outside normal, cruelty to animals, for example, cruelty to children, and it doesn't just have to be physical cruelty, it could be psychological cruelty. They need to be very cautious, they need to be responsible and try to get some help for that person. People are very particular that they don't want to get into other people's business, but sometimes as a society you have to get into other people's business because you're trying to protect them and everyone else. Some of these tragedies are preventable if people just sat back and thought that this is not normal, what this person is doing is not explained under any normal circumstances, and makes a phone call, maybe calls the local attorney's office or calls the police and gets some help for them. But people don't do that, they don't want to get involved.
And of course, Leah, at the time that this program is being prepared, the tragedy in Blacksburg, Virginia at Virginia Tech is within recent memory. And of course, in our local area, we've had a high school circumstance in which many people were injured and some killed. And that is just the issue of people seeing a person's behavior and not relating it to the possibility is he may not be violent now, but isn't that correct?
And it's better safe than sorry, better careful to ask those questions and take action and be caring towards someone and get them help. If you see those little warning signs, it may not even be outright, but...
Now, I know a lot of our audience knows that in the situation regarding child abuse, teachers, professionals, they're under a legal obligation. Most people feel a moral obligation to report that this child is being abused. They enjoy the same anonymity calling adult protection or calling you to report the neighbor across the road who's beating his dog or screaming at the neighborhood kids as someone reporting child abuse, don't they?
Yeah, we have the same responsibility to an adult we have concern over that we do to a child. And I hope everybody remembers that if you have a concern, call Adult Protective Services or call the police.
And Doctor, we of course, while we don't have the greatest system in the country, we are developing a program where these cases can be brought rapidly to the attention of the county attorney, then to you, then to my office, and then perhaps on to several of the treatment facilities across Kentucky in the area.
Yes, in Paducah, I hope within the next few months that we have the kind of service where you call us, you don't have to give your name if you don't want to, and you report the service, the problems that you're seeing, and we will try to find a way to get that person the services that they need. And we are developing it. It's going to be an outpatient, it's going to be partly using our inpatient service, but that one phone call can trigger off a whole series of events that would help the person a lot.
And obviously, Leah, the home health care has a psychiatric system where we can assist with an in-home visit if the people are worried that this is something that you don't want to be exposed to, I don't want to go to the hospital and let everybody see. We will actually visit you in your home from treatment point of view as opposed to the legal issue, can't we?
And the social workers on the unit can refer out to appropriate agencies for follow-up after hospitalization, which might be home health or psychiatric care, Four Rivers Behavioral Health, private counselors in the community, private psychiatrists. There's a lot of different facilities that will refer out to what best fits that person's needs.
So even though you have the legal system watching over the circumstance, you don't necessarily need to invoke the court system to get treatment for people, do you?
Right.
As long as they're willing to do so.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so many people are willing to do so. A lot of people are willing to get that help. It takes a lot of courage to ask for help, but I see it every day where people make that choice. I'm going to do this. It's hard to walk in there, but I'm going to get help and I'm going to get better, and they do.
Doctor, one of the things that we have brushed upon in my practice is the number of people that after they have been informed, they've been arrested for behavior, they've been brought in by a family member against their will on an involuntary request, they recognize that they have a problem. Many of those people turn to you voluntarily for assistance, don't they?
Yes, they do. And what often happens is that as soon as they get into our place, they're medicated, the chemical imbalances that are causing the behavior in the first place, and I just want to point it out, it's nobody's fault, it's no one's will that they do that. Sometimes the brain biochemistry just goes haywire and they don't know what they're doing. But as soon as you're able to get some medication into their system and you're able to talk to them, they do realize they have a problem, and for the most part people do stay in treatment and do stay well. They take their medication and we have very few problems.
Well, I know that many of the serious cases we have, there's actual medical physiological causes of the behavioral patterns which evince the mental illness.
Correct. And there are medications which can be given on a long-term basis. For example, you can get an injection once a month which keeps your biochemistry in check and you don't have any problems. But the difficulty again comes back, as I mentioned in the beginning, that they will do well for 6 months, do well for 8 months and think they don't need the treatment anymore and that they are cured. But there is no cure. It's just that you can use the medication to keep everything normal, but you can never cure the illness completely. So they do relapse if they stop taking the medication.
And Leah, that's one of the issues that you and I have talked about, how many people are willing to embarrass themselves for the purpose of being examined for different kinds of cancer, different kinds of diseases that they recognize are serious, that they have to be examined in a very personal and very embarrassing method. And yet mental illness is just as serious, just as deadly, and is least intrusive upon being examined. And it's difficult to deal with that, isn't it?
And the thing about it is they could have such a better quality of life with treatment, and there's things out there that can help pretty much fairly quickly. Our average length of stay might be 5 to 7 days on average. And I see such a big improvement in people. It's wonderful. They get their quality of life back.
That's an excellent point, Doctor. Your actual, once people submit themselves to the problem and identify the problem, the recovery rate, not necessarily the cure rate, but the recovery rate where people deal with their illness over time is significant, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And like Leah said, it takes 5 to 7 days to stabilize them. We move them to the outpatient program at that time. And it does not take long, and as again the quality of life is looked at, it improves significantly. Needless suffering people have because they don't recognize that it's a treatable problem can be alleviated.
One of the small issues that we have is the substance abuse. Do you see a great deal of substance abuse in these people?
Yes. I would take a guess at 40 to 60%. That would be my guess.
And is that their reaction, trying to cure their illness themselves by treating it with illegal narcotics, alcohol, and other types of substances?
Sometimes it's self-medication. Some people just have addictions, and we see all sorts of different reasons.
Okay. Doctor, in your behalf, how many people are covering up their mental illness by some type of illegal narcotic addiction, and how many people are driven to that by their illness?
Well, it's an interesting point. You know, for example, if you have ADHD, the medicine that you get is amphetamine. Now, you could actually take amphetamine on the streets and do very well. For example, I have people who have severe ADHD, but when they take methamphetamine, they don't get high, they just feel very mellow. So people do that, they self-medicate. If you're depressed, for example, and you drink heavily, you don't have to focus on your problems. But these are short-term cures. They have their own difficulties and problems, and ultimately they become worse. So it does help. We see that a lot, but I think that there's no substitute for the actual treatment.
With the fact that most of these treatments are illegal as well.
Well, that's, yes.
Now, one of the issues, of course, with mental illness in the law is mental retardation. We haven't had a chance to talk about that because that's basically a developmental problem that's identified hopefully very early in a person's career. But it is a circumstance that your policy, there are programs with the hospital to help with that, isn't there, Leah?
For mental retardation, and,
Yes.
and we work a lot with Four Rivers in regards to that also.
And they have the same situation where guardianships, treatment, medication, retraining doctor, the things that are a little bit out of your expertise and line, but you have your associates who deal with those people on a regular basis.
Correct. We don't have a mental retardation unit, but again, it is peripheral to what we do, and there are a number of resources available, like Leah said, and we refer them there, and I wish people would use them more. They're not fully utilized.
The circumstance at Lourdes Hospital is we're trying to expand our assistance to these people in the community, and of course Lourdes is taking a big step. We receive patients throughout Western Kentucky. Leah, how far do you actually cover in a geographical area?
I say we get people from Illinois. I've had patients from Missouri, all the way up through the Pennyroll area. So I don't know what the mileage is, but it's a pretty large area because we're the only psychiatric unit, inpatient psychiatric unit in a Western State is the next one over in Kentucky, and it's in Hopkinsville.
In Christian County, and otherwise we would probably go at least halfway there, if not further. And doctor, that a huge geographical area means that there's many people who probably do not know of the services we're providing.
Correct.
Because they're not going to see our system, and many people outside McCracken County are probably not going to see this program.
Well, that's unfortunate because there is help available, and like I said, all it needs is a phone call. We're developing a service where once you call us, we can very quickly plug you into the appropriate place. So I wish more people would be aware of it and would utilize the service.
Well, let's hope that they do, because it is something that America is coming to grips with. It is a problem that we're having to deal with over and over, and hopefully, like all the other circumstances we have about cancer, we've been dealing with this, and we have the opportunity, we have the tools. I'd like to again thank Dr. Rakesh Chandra and Miss Leah Edwards from Lourdes Hospital. They've been most gracious with their time and their service. I look forward to working with you both. Ladies and gentlemen, I have appreciated the opportunity to be here. I hope we've provided some information. You understand this is not a technical experience for us to give you legal advice, but to bring access to you to the services that we have available on the issue of mental illness in Western Kentucky, the law of Kentucky as it deals with it, and your rights and services as it may be. Again, it's been a privilege and a pleasure with you both. I look forward to many years and hopefully a lot of success in our business.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.